For all the games that push emergent play, I have yet to read any actual concrete advice on how to get started and make the players, and by extension the PCs, care in the first place. Good morning, my name is Taylor, this is the Whispering GM, and that was a sub-quote from an X post that I read not too long ago, and it spoke to me a little bit. If there is no actual concrete advice on how to get started and how to make the players care in an emergent scenario, I'm going to try to do that right here, today on the Whispering GM. Prior to trying to solve the problem, let's contextualize what the problem is. Now, I'd given you a subset of the tweet before, but I'll finish it off here. I have yet to read any actual concrete advice on how to get started. Everyone I have ever spoken to, excluding online, Editor's note. The podcaster does double thumbs at this point, incriminating himself. Has been totally clueless about what to do if you just plop them in a town with a dozen points of interest nearby and ask, what do you want to do, without giving them some kind of quest or plot hook to lead them to one. I'll put a link as best I can to the tweet, or at least to the account that posted it, and I want to engage this because I've been playing the game shorter than some, longer than others have been alive. But so I've done this a handful of times. And while by no means do I think that I am the authority on the subject, I'm more than happy to share my experience and hope that it can help to inform someone else's. You can make different mistakes than the ones I did, so to speak. On that note, what is emergent play? In order to define a solution, then you need to first identify what are we talking about. My first thought when I saw that was to speak to emergent narrative, but I did a little bit of reading, and we've kind of established a bigger picture in the tabletop community to talk about what this means. The first factor of an emergent play game is an emphasis on player agency. That's talking about what do you want to do. This is in contrast to sort of a railroad or a board game where the objective is kind of set for you, and the players move towards that goal. In an emergent game, you want the players to come up with their own motives, come up with their own goals, and in a way, come up with their own win conditions. In order to do that, you have to set up a sandbox. They have to be able to explore. They have to be able to move outside of the confines of the adventure path, so to speak, and you need to have enough in the area in order for them to form those goals and to achieve them. If they want to build a castle, there needs to be a place where a castle can be built. If they want to go to sea, they need to be able to find a port town somewhere. All of that is stuff I already know. But when I was reading, a third thing came up: embrace the dice. So one of the temptations that I've spoken on before is to fudge the dice, and that's one of the topics that used to roll around back when RPG Twitter was still about RPGs. But you'll be tempted as the referee to change what's on the dice. So you may want to have an encounter, so you'll tip it to the encounter occurs. You may want a fight to have a particular outcome, so you'll tip it to it. You don't want to do that in an emergent game. Arguably, you don't want to do that at all, but I did another podcast on that. So the important part here, the recognition that the dice are going to produce a better story than you would by yourself. One of the advantages of dice is that they're going to produce outcomes you don't expect. There's a goblin warren where there shouldn't be. A big monster falls to the small party, and that kind of stuff can happen with the dice. And the fact that the dice are by their nature kind of balanced. That is, if you roll a die, a six-sided die, 1,000 times, you're going to get about the same number of ones as you do sixes. And so things that have a lower probability of happening are going to happen. They're just not going to happen often. And things that have a higher probability are going to be, that gives the players a way to be predictable. They can make their plans according to what they assume is going to happen. But also it throws those curveballs into the game, and you can produce those epic narrative moments at a cadence that actually makes sense. So embrace the dice. Let that layer show up where it's not supposed to be. Let that monster show up, or hey, have that reaction roll come off as super positive when you expected a fight. And then lastly, retroactive storytelling. That's the original concept that I remember talking about in terms of the emergent game style is emergent narrative. That is, you don't know the story beforehand. You find out the story by playing it. This runs in contrast to a lot of modern adventure styles. I mentioned the adventure path earlier. It assumes that you're following a set of goals. Now, and that's not a new thing either. One of the complaints against the Dragonlance series of modules is that it's kind of a railroad. It assumes you're following a very specific path, and it gives you suggestions on, if certain negative outcomes had happened, how to retcon them in order for the next module to make sense. So, not going to get into styles of play here, not here to rip on Dragonlance, but now that we understand what is emergent play, that emphasis on agency, the necessity of the sandbox, the embrace of the dice, and the emergent narrative and the emergent plot, how do you get your players to take the initiative and leave town in the first place? So, how to get the player motivated? Well, the answer is kind of hidden in the quote. What do you want to do without giving them a quest or plot hook? That's the trick. You do give them a quest or a plot hook. Points of interest are necessary. You want to have dungeons. You want to have interesting NPCs that will challenge the players to get involved and to build relationships and to build their character wealth. But you have to give them a reason to go there. So the goal is you'll put hooks out there, and it's not a plot hook. It's just a regular hook. It's a villager stumbling into town saying that their farm has been overrun by goblins. It's a wanted poster that's been stapled to the side of the tavern wall. It's something that will get their attention and speak to what they want their character to be. In order to get the player initially motivated, at least, you need to have hooks out there for them. And think about fishing context. A hook is not going to catch anything unless it has bait on it. So you want to figure out what kind of bait hooks your players. Now, keep in mind, I say players, not player characters, because a player may have in mind an idea for their character, but you have to tie into the player because they're not necessarily going to be, method acting at your table. They're going to have emotional responses to your world, and you're going to want to tap into that in order to get them to engage with your world. Keep in mind, get to know your players and what they want, then bait the hooks according to what works on them. The player, not the player character. Now I want my players to be engaged with my world. How do I craft a hook for them? Well, we want to speak to what speaks to our players, but there are some fundamental truths that we can dive into that work at most tables. I like to reward my players. I like to give them treasure when they do the right thing. I like to give them XP bonuses when they behave in a manner that's consistent with the setting and improves the immersion factor. But there's a lot of wisdom to how Gary did it. And by that, I mean, you look at the stuff he writes, he prefers the stick over the carrot. Training, for example, that's a deep gold sink, and if you're role-playing wrong, he will punish you. in the original LBBs, look at how XP is calculated. It never gets better than 100%, but if you're on an easy dungeon level, he will 100% dock you XP. So why does he do this? Well, the same reason that your social media will intentionally put things in front of you that tick you off. People tend to respond with more emotion to negative things. When you are trying to motivate your players, put a negative thing in front of them. A good one is slavery. Everyone I've ever played with has this visceral distaste for slavery. So whenever there's a slave wagon, whenever there's a slave market, immediately the players almost always are going to find a way to release the slaves, defeat the slavers, that there are entire modules that are devoted to this concept, because you essentially know, based on how we as 21st century enlightened minds, how we're going to react to that. We don't like that, and we want that to go away. So you're going to tap into this fundamental cultural element and motivate your players to move. On the other hand, you may run into a surprise where they do the opposite. They may engage with the negative behavior, and you're now running an evil campaign. So put something in front of them that's negative, and they will usually engage with it, either joining in and doing bad things, or more likely trying to break it and trying to make the world a better place. Another thing that will keep your players motivated, and honestly will probably keep them motivated for a while, rivals. Players hate losing. If you steal something from them, if a rival adventuring party gets to the treasure before they do, oh my word, they will hate them forever, and they will stop at nothing. Almost every, like the most lawful paladin you've ever met will absolutely track down that first level thief to the den of iniquity and then hang that guy over a copper coin. It's just the way players tend to be wired. And that is doubly for if you're working in a milestone and the party is prevented from hitting it. Oh man, they will see that as an obstacle. If you're doing gold for XP, like I tend to prefer, treasure. Oh man, if they lose treasure, if they get stuff stolen from them, is like a magic item, or if it robs them of advancement. Oh man, you're going to create enemies for life. And then that gives you an opportunity to bring those characters up. If they end up defeating them, that's a big win for them. If they don't, then you have a continuous thorn in their side to get them to do something. And if you have the good guys, then maybe they put them on a redemption arc. But the key here is not that they are the enemy and that you're feeding adventures to them. It's that you're creating a situation where you can predict your players how they're going to react, and then you can use that to kind of motivate them. So if they find out the enemy has a stronghold, they may attack the stronghold. If they find out the enemy is going somewhere, they may go there on purpose, and they may seek that information from you. They may put out feelers to try to find that enemy. And so that's the turning point. You want them to engage with the world, not for you to spoon feed them all the time. In order to do that, you create those points of contention where the player psychology kicks in and they want to do stuff. Craft your win condition around things the players like, but craft your lose condition around things the players really don't. Listening back, you may have noticed I've said a lot about initial engagement or starting engagement. And in that regard, I want to bring up Snotnose the Goblin. This meme goes by other names in other places, but namely, the gist of it is you have your very important, very well named, very well thought out king NPC with his knights errant, but then the party just happens to ask about the goblin servant sweeping in the corner, and you haven't thought about that at all, so you name it something stupid off the top of your head, and all of a sudden that goblin is the single most important thing to them, and they need to adopt it and take care of it forever. That's a meme, of course, but I bring it up on purpose because, again, you don't craft hooks based on what the player says they want or what you think they should want based on their character, but hooks should occur based on what you observe that they follow through on. And when they start interacting with the world, they're going to start finding those hooks themselves. People usually don't know what they want, but once you get them in the game, once you have relationships established, and once you have the environment, once they feel at home in the environment, then they're going to interact with it. One thing I don't want to walk away without saying, keep in mind the word sandbox does not mean liberty from outside influence. Quite the opposite. The world goes on without your players in it. So there is no reason, once you have allies, once you have factions, that those factions can't do stuff against each other. And that provides a hook in and of itself. And a player who is involved in a faction is going to be emotionally connected to their goals, and they're going to try to push for those goals. They're going to look for ways to advance those goals. If I'm in a thieves guild that wants to expand into a new city, then I'm going to look for ways to recruit. I'm going to look for people to take out over there. I'm going to look for ways to make it easier for me to put my guild in this next city over, because it's my organization. I'm a part of it now. And invested parties like that will frequently try to move up in the ranks of guilds. They like advancement in the guild as much as they like advancement as a player character. This is something that will very quickly ingrain them into the system. They will build relationships. They will think in game. And when you meet a new person, how many new people that you meet are garrulous right away, who will chat you up for hours right away? Or do you have to kind of break the ice? The key here is breaking the ice for your adventuring party. The world is new to them. You are intimately familiar with it because you built it, but the world is new to them. They don't know the NPCs. They don't know the cultural customs. There are certain assumptions that are going on because you're playing the same game that they've played before. Everyone has some basic assumptions when they walk into a D&D alike, but by and large, it's new to them. And as a result, they have to get their feet wet before they're going to get in. And once those feet are wet, they will usually start swimming. And when they swim, don't be afraid if their goals contradict each other. Having contrary goals within a party at low levels may be contrary to, succeeding in the dungeon. But once you're involved in something bigger than that, all of a sudden they may be interested in a stable, they may be interested in running multiple PCs, they may have one player's faction work against the other's player's faction, all of it because they're both heavily invested, and all of a sudden the plots make themselves, and you, the referee, operate more as like a CPU for their process. One criticism that I'd like to address that comes up in less polite conversation that I've made myself before, if you have a player who is not engaging with the world, if is not engaging with the adventure, why are they playing an adventure game? Like, you don't go into a game of Cards Against Humanity if you don't want to have offensive humor. You don't play a game of Catan if you don't want to build roads and towns. You don't play Risk if you don't intend on making military maneuvers. Why would you play an OSR alike without the desire for going into the dungeon and pulling treasure out? That doesn't make sense. While true, that doesn't make sense, you also have to consider the note from before. How many people are going to be outgoing all the way at first? Further, some people aren't the choose your own adventure types. Like, it's kind of like there are people who work day-to-day jobs, but not all of them start businesses. It's the same principle. It's just they're not going to be the caller. So don't feel bad if somebody does not engage, but the rest of the party does. If that person keeps showing up, if that person contributes when they're in it, that's fine. Don't worry if they're not trying to contend for leadership within the party. If they're playing their role, if they're having fun, if they keep coming back, that's perfectly fine. And if the caller being absent means that you have to go spearfishing instead of a baited hook when they are in charge, that's okay. Don't worry too much, because at the end of the day, what you as the referee care about is that the party is deciding where it wants to adventure. And so long as that adventure happens, your goal has been achieved. All right, so my players are finally invested and they know the NPCs' names, they've set their own goals, and our play is fairly emergent. How do I keep it that way and avoid having the party burn out on me? Well, there's a couple things that I've personally noticed that can lead to a party kind of resetting and no longer engaging with your environment. And so this, I guess, is the part of the show where I say, learn from my mistakes. So the first of this is long travel. Just because you had a cool idea doesn't mean you should teleport your party or have them go on a long voyage to get there. It effectively restarts the motive cycle when you do that. In my experience, I once had a very successful swamp/tropical campaign going on, but then I had this cool vision of what a dwarf palace could look like in the mountains, and so I dropped a MacGuffin in and had the party move off to do this other quest. All of a sudden, they didn't care anymore. They didn't care, they didn't look at the hooks, and the reason for that is because they weren't invested anymore. They were far away from everything they'd learned, they were far away from everyone they had talked to, and it was essentially a new campaign just out of the blue that they didn't really agree to. It was just something that happened that they made the mistake of accepting when I put in front of them. So you can place a hook, but don't force the issue. Keep the idea, because there's nothing stopping you from running a new game, a new campaign a year or so down the line, whenever your existing one kind of slows down or naturally, whatever. But so you can use the idea in the future. You may be able to combine it with other ideas. And if they take the hook, do not fast travel. Either give them a way to get home rapidly if it starts to look kind of like it's going to cause the campaign to lose steam. Just don't fast travel it. You can give them adventures along the way, meet people along the way, so they build up that same experience, it's a constant exposure as they're on their travel. Continuity. Continuity was the word I was looking for. I was called out on this in one of my early games because I played a lot of Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind when I was a kid, and that influenced my game campaigns. I would litter the area with small dungeons, small quests, and just little that you would do as you were going on your way to your bigger goal. They made fun of me for it at the time, but I think it's a valid strategy. It builds immersion in the world, it makes it feel more alive, and when scenery changes, it prevents that change of scenery from resetting the player's brain, kind of like how you'll go into a new room and forget what you went into the room for. So that's a tone shift for a environment, but you also want to avoid a tone shift in terms of the campaign. So the same way that going from the tropics to the Arctic can cause the players to shunt into a new engagement cycle, so also can changing from a dungeon crawl to a city crawl, or changing from a dungeon crawl to domain management. Not all players are going to stick around for that kind of a game, especially if you jump into, commanding armies in the field. One of the key contention points for a lot of people coming into the game from newer editions is hirelings. They just don't like using them. And that's something that you need to do in order to engage in the warband and the castle lord part that is kind of built into the OSR experience and rule set. So how do you deal with this? Because you're going to hit it if the player characters survive, if they keep making gold, they keep getting experience, they're going to get there eventually. So what do you do to account for it? Well, my personal suggestion: encourage a stable. The domain guys can keep their high-level characters and run off and do domain stuff. Then the people who don't enjoy the domain characters, they retire and pull up old characters, or maybe they're high level character becomes an advisor or some other non-player character, and they can go back to dungeon crawling. They can engage with the part of the game they enjoy. And your domain guys, with their alternative characters, they still engage at the same level as the other guys, but you then have conversations outside for domain management and campaign turns. That's how my buddy Steven over at Purple Druid, he ran a game where he had a set of patrons who were giving orders and contending with each other, but there was also several sets of player characters that were adventuring in the game. Now, I can't do that. I have too many children in order to be able to spend that much time kind of orchestrating a game or playing a game, but he did it really well. And so a lot of the players didn't realize they were engaging with things that were happening in the world were being orchestrated by other players, and you just couldn't tell because it was within the world itself. And so once you hit that kind of place where the tone shifts, think about kind of splitting that off. If everybody in the game likes it, do it, run with it, keep playing. But if you start seeing, sort of one player really enjoys it and one player just kind of starts missing sessions, consider the stable, consider breaking it up, and consider running a multi-level campaign. Or multi-tier would be a better way to put that. And the last thing that I would bring up that can cause a reset of the motivation cycle, PC death. Very quickly, that will cause player disengagement. At low level, not so much. Like if my level 2 thief dies and I bring in a level 1 thief, that doesn't really change that much for me. But if I've spent a lot of time on a character in a BX game, if I'm 6th, 7th level, that first level doesn't sound as appealing anymore. It can cause me to kind of drop out because I had goals, I had objectives, and those are gone. And that can cause someone to drop out of a campaign or just not, or even if they stay in the campaign, they just kind of become a follower instead of a leader. So one of the things you can do to kind of help with that, if the party is moving as a party motive, I'm not pursuing my interest, or my group is fighting for a group interest, have them take over a hireling. Like a torchbearer, have them play the torchbearer, have them play a man-at-arms, and then at the end of the session say, hey, do you want to keep this character? And so all of a sudden, they're still part of the gang. They're still part of the group. They're still involved and invested, and that's the key. They're invested in what the group is doing. Alternatively, if the character had his own motives, it was they were trying to pursue something outside of a collective objective, have them bring in a relative. There are actually rules in LBB, I assume they moved forward to the other editions as well, about inheritance. So you can give stuff. You can inherit some wealth. You can essentially start over from the level wise, but then you maintain that same you maintain that same connection with the character objectives. Slarty Blart Flask the second comes in, and Slarty Blart Flask the third comes in to continue work of their grandfather. Siblings work, cousins work. What the key is you have a character that kind of hooks into the previous character so that there is a continuity of capability and objective. Now, starting over at level 1, hirelings usually don't. Hirelings are usually like a level behind, so there's a very short gap to keep up. It's up to you whether you want to force the player to start the relative off at level 1, but even if you do, I wouldn't worry too much because you think about the way that XP works in old school games, they're going to catch up really fast. You look at the XP track of any major class, generally speaking, the next level is going to cost as much XP as it takes to get to the level you are. So if I'm level 8, by the time I get to level 9, the dead PC's buddy will get to level 7 or 8, assuming we're still adventuring together. And so then if all else fails, give them a quest to resurrect. Have a cleric offer them a favor, like reading the Eyes of the Overworld. The reason Cudgel goes out and seeks these eyes is because he gets caught by a wizard for stealing and gets a geas cast on him. They put he puts a worm in his belly that's going to kill him if he doesn't do the quest. So you don't have to be that kind of nihilistic about it, but the idea is the same. Have them go on a quest. Maybe have them run a hireling to get to the quest, or maybe they'll do it in arrears so that they raise the dead, but you only stay alive if you do this other thing. And so all of a sudden, the character death becomes a spearfishing quest hook for you. And then once that completes, you have all of your same motivations before, but also you now have this relationship with the cleric who brought you back. Whether that's a positive relationship or whether that's a kind of adversarial one, a la Eyes of the Overworld, that depends on how you roleplay it. And the player has new hooks to discover and invent on their own. My last thoughts on the subject, which arguably should have been the first, chronologically speaking, starting your campaign. So you're not necessarily going to know, unless you've played with the same group for a long time, exactly what is going to motivate the player. And people change over time, and they may have different ideas. So how do you hook them before you know what their mood and their current state of emotion is going to react? Now, you may have a player who does immediately take to the adventure. I'm thinking back to one of my early games in the 90s. It was just my brother, one of his friends, and me. I made a big adventure map, some mountains on one side, an ocean on the other side, and a bunch of forests and plains and swamp in the middle where we could do adventures. They both made dwarves, so I said, okay, they'll start out in the dwarven stronghold in the northeast corner of the map. And so we plop down. They immediately invest their starting resources in an expeditionary party, and they say, we're going north. Which there was no north. I had made the mistake of starting them in the upper right in my graph paper map. So we did figure it out, but the moral of that story is start your players in the middle, not in one far corner of the map. But that's beside the story I'm trying to get to here. You can't always assume that you're going to have that. You're going to have to provide opportunities for them to dive into the world. And the best way to do that, in my experience, and based on some modules that I've seen written by the original TSR crew, plant them directly into the action. Start them at the dungeon, and then allow their presuppositions to be either confirmed or formed before their aspirations then spring forth. When you start them in a dungeon, that means they don't really have to think about why they're there. You can give them a little background, but generally speaking, they'll see the dungeon door and think, oh yeah, this is where we're supposed to go. Maybe you'll start them with a map that says, on level 2, look for this secret door between the statues. They'll be on the lookout for that. They'll search the dungeon for that, assuming there's treasure on the other side. Maybe you give them outside. We'll steal one from Diablo, the original. Maybe they walk in and they find someone bleeding on the floor who tells them about a horrible danger that they now have to avoid. I can steal another one from a friend of mine who ran for us in college. He started a campaign in a pitched battle, and then the outcome of that battle kind of determined the direction the campaign went. There were a couple different avenues it could have gone, and based on how we fought, based on how that came out, determined where our next adventure was going to be and where our base of operations was going to end up. But what the main benefit of that is by setting them at the foot of the dungeon, they're immediately in the action, the tone of the game is set, and they don't have to make those decisions right away. It gives you an opportunity. There's a natural direction for them to go. A good way to reinforce that natural direction, too, start them with a catastrophe. I've started games with shipwrecks before, where they were captured and they were shipwrecked, and then they came out into a storm and they had to seek shelter in a dungeon. Another good one is being lost. So if they get lost, that's how B4, the Lost City, begins. It presupposes that that gives them some box text that you were a part of this caravan, but you got separated in a sandstorm. And now they've come across a lost city, a pyramid, that they need to get into in order to survive. Beneath that, there's a pretty decent sized dungeon, like 100 rooms or so, if I remember right. But beneath that, there's a very open city, by which I mean it's not mapped out aggressively. It's not mapped out in detail. It assumes that you, the referee, are going to mess with it. You're going to set up these factions. You're going to figure out what is down there, and you can kind of tailor the way that the world looks to what is getting the party moving. Which factions do they encounter? Which factions are more speaking to their personalities, easing them in to the motive cycle. And that's another note to learn from B4 is there needs to be a stronghold nearby. If you're going to start them with catastrophe, you need to have a town or a safe place nearby. I've had games start where there wasn't, and we were just wilderness crawling from day one. I have not had good luck with that, so it's important to have a place for them to rest and recuperate if you're going to start them with a catastrophe like that. But back to B4, that's one of the most beloved modules out there. You hear a lot of praise for B4 in the wider OSR ecosystem. Good example, starting the party at the gate of the dungeon and motivating them with a catastrophe that it kind of pushes them, gives them a framing to how the adventure begins. One thing I try not to do is start the players in a tavern. People talk about starting the game in the tavern. You always start in the tavern. No, never start in the tavern, because this is the fundamental mistake in the sandbox. You can't assume that they're going to go do something. Remember about the hook metaphor. If you want the fish to bite, you have to bait the hook. So if you absolutely must put them in a tavern, you need to put something in front of them for them to bite down on. Don't put them in there and say, "What do you do next?" expecting them to go seek adventure. Put them in a tavern and then have someone crash through the door clutching a mysterious map and then die in front of them. I've got a beautiful scene in Treasure Planet, and if anybody remembers that movie, that's essentially how that adventure begins. Then, or alternatively, have someone in the corner telling tall tales. They'll ask for a silver, but they'll show you their missing hand, and they'll tell you about this horrible trap that they definitely saw treasure on the other side of, but they lost their hand and had to flee. Then, from earlier, you have your farmers who are now beggars because their lands have been overcome by a mysterious miasma, and they had to leave behind their valuables. So you have two motives there. You have people who are kind of, thieves who are going to try to steal the valuables, or B, you have the heroes who want to go out and understand what's going on to try to cure this and restore those people. Don't just start them in the tavern. Start them in the tavern and have something obvious for them to latch onto. It's spearfishing in a way, but it'll get them moving. It will start them interacting with the world, and it will give them an opportunity both to acclimate to the world and also feel a part, build those ties so that they bind themselves to the world. And once they build those ties, motivations, goals naturally form. In conclusion, speak to players' interests. Don't expect them to speak to their own. And it's about picking an adventure, not about forcing them to author that adventure for themselves at the onset. Will they become co-authors in your emergent narrative? Absolutely. That's the point of playing a game. But you have to give them a framing in order for them to really thrive. Take that seed and plant it so the vine will grow. And the foundations of the thresholds shook at the voice of him who called, and the house was filled with smoke. And I said, Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts. Then one of the seraphim flew to me, having in his hand a burning coal that he had taken with tongs from the altar. And he touched my mouth and said, Behold, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, Here I am, send me. That is, of course, Isaiah chapter 6, and signals that I'm going to pivot. Last episode, I gave you kind of a part one of the mission trip that I was privileged to attend and participate in. And so today, I'm going to share with you part two, the other half of the equation. Last time I talked about a community center and helping the kids and doing good for preventive maintenance, trying to make life into a state that would prevent someone from needing or being tempted by the human trafficking, the lies it offers. In addition, we also got to look at the other side of that coin. You may have noticed that this episode was flagged as explicit in the Spotify uploader, at least. This section is the reason. Now, I will not be using any foul language, nor will I be making any graphic depictions, but some of the stuff that we saw is not appropriate for the family. So I want to warn you in advance if you're listening to this on blast in the car or like background noise with kids around, that this might be a good section to skip. If the previous episode talked about prevention, I guess this talks about postvention. And in order to really speak to that, it's good to tell you what's going on. Nominally, prostitution is illegal in Peru. Nominally, labor trafficking is illegal. It is classed as exploitation. However, the federal government only has so much it can do with the resources it has, and the local government, money talks, and sometimes money tells you to look the other way. Our stint downtown, we drove down, and you look down a street, and there are women lining up for sale. They are in the employ of men with black hats who will take care of the business side of the exchange, and these women will have 10, 12 clients in a given hour. We were there at 1:32 in the afternoon. It was there in broad daylight. It's a 24/7 operation, may take it in shifts. And the hardest part for me was knowing that they all claim that they're 21, but it's really obvious that some of them are not. I will leave it to your interpretation to elaborate on that particular point. So we partnered with a second organization, which what they do is we had a group of women who would go and speak to the girls who were not presently engaged. And we had a group of men who stayed on the other side of the street, kind of played lookout. The men in our group were not permitted to go across the street. We do not talk to the girls. You do not look at the girls, lest the men in the black hats misinterpret your intents. And it would be better for the girls if we don't cause a ruckus. So while the men in our party were across the street, kind of keeping an eye, the women in our party would speak to the non-engaged girls. The pimps don't care about that. If a client approaches, you back off, and business, so long as you're not impacting their business, they don't care. So what they would do is they would go and share the gospel and give contact information. Those were the big things: share the gospel and share contact information for this organization. And what the organization does, it provides free stuff. Most of the girls on the street will have young children. Many of them have infants from obvious sources. They will give them baby supplies. They'll give them formula, they'll give them diapers, they'll provide some additional security, they'll help with educational stuff or child care. Because some girls will come from the local area, but the majority, in order to foster a sense of necessary dependence, they will ship them from somewhere else. Some girls were from, I'm secondhand relating this, but some girls will come from other countries that are around the area. Some girls will come from the jungle on the other side of the Andes, but the important part is that the traffickers will separate them from a safety net and instill almost a Stockholm syndrome in them. And so they look at pimps and who are obviously exploiting them, to those of us looking on the outside, because they will perform the act. The money doesn't get to them, but they'll get, they'll have somewhere to live. They'll have food to eat. And so they don't see it as exploitation from where they are, because they think that these men are taking care of them. So by giving them things, the pimps don't care. They'll say, now I don't have to buy that. This is good for me. But what this does is it'll turn a light on for those girls. It's like, they really don't want anything back. They really are trying to help. And so that allows them to start having conversations about Christ and about the implicit worth of the human as an image bearer of God. And I apologize if the editing here is a little choppy. I'm having a hard time recording this, but hopefully it doesn't come out that way in editing. And they get to know them. They start talking about, well, what would you like to do with your life? What did you do before? I think some of them may want to go home. Some of them just like, I want to run a bodega. So a little shop. You've heard this term before. They show up in New York, but I want to run a little shop. I'll live on the second floor. I'll sell things on the first floor so I can be with my family. I can raise my children and provide for them. Others may want to open a bakery. Maybe one of them wants to learn to tailoring, but they don't have a way to do that. And so once the mission partner knows, then they can act. They'll find the real estate, they'll pay rent for a few months for them and get them started. They'll find a way to make that dream come true, because lo and behold, no one wakes up as a little girl and thinks, I want to be a prostitute when I grow up. What a surprise. They'll make a way for that other dream to happen. And what is the cost of that? It's not about cost. It's what is the payout. It's an investment. It's one more soul taken out of that lifestyle and one more soul brought to grace and forgiveness. And the traffickers don't care. There is an infinite supply of people they can do this to. And so they'll just move on to the next victim. But one more taken out of that life. So I witnessed this, but full transparency, I did not participate. Our team had split into two. I went with some folks who didn't feel comfortable talking to these people, and we helped to set up for a survivors event where the women would come and speak and share testimony. And it was a girls-only event. The rest of us went to a Chinese restaurant next door. Peruvians, in Lima at least, they love Chinese restaurant. You see, it's called chifa. That's just, you see that on every. So if you're watching a South American movie and you see that, that's a Chinese restaurant. You cannot throw a dead cat and miss a chifa restaurant, but it's everywhere. It was actually pretty good. That was my favorite meal while we were there. I digress. I was away helping with that because some people aren't comfortable with it, and I was recovering from surgery, and I didn't know if I could walk for that long. I didn't know if I could stand for a 2-3 hour stretch. And then there were some folks, they were under 21, and so they were excluded just for safety and decency. And as I recall, I think 8 women came to that event, and that's 8 testimonies, 8 stories, 8 successes, 8 more people who don't live in that life. But while we were setting up, one of the men, they looked over and they said, let's give the gospel to one of the the Johns, one of the purchasers. And so they spoke to him. They talked about Christ. They talked about the sacrifice that he'd made, the free gift that's available for everyone. And it doesn't matter where you've been, where you've come from, what you're doing now, but what you can be in Christ. And that made a bit of a scene, not too much of an interruption, but it just distracted a bit. And it gave the women on the other side of the street an unprecedented amount of time with one of the girls that they spoke to. Now, there were many women they talked to that day. There was one who had been there less than a month, and I don't know if she spoke too much with them, but she didn't like talking. Then there were men also. The next street over was the transvestite street. The same service was being offered. The same brokers were handling the money, but you got young men and boys who were in drag. And I say transvestite on purpose, not transsexual. These men will put on the dress, put on the makeup for their shift, but then when they're not working, they'll dress and act like any other man in the city. It's a job for them, one that they're stuck in. Now, the men don't like to talk to the missionaries. I was told because they have operations there, do a local, but the local women don't like, who go out and speak, the transvestite street, they usually will duck away and they don't want to talk. But this one girl that our group got to speak to, they spoke to her for 6 minutes. So usually you get tops 30, 45 seconds before you get the stink eye and you have to kind of move along. But Christ, speaking to his apostles, Mark 13, do not be anxious beforehand what you are to say, but say whatever is given you in that hour, for it is not you who speak, but the Holy Spirit. And for our team, the Spirit spoke. They just gave the gospel. They gave the info card. They shared the gospel, and they just poured into this girl for 5 minutes. And then on the street, in that kind of minute, she accepted forgiveness. She accepted salvation, and she gave her life to Christ. Is she still on the street? Maybe, but that doesn't matter, because this is one soul saved. This is one person entering the kingdom of heaven who is getting more celebration than 99 people who had a boring story. And from there, we've kept up on a group chat, the mission team, and 4 of those women, they gave out, I don't know how many people they spoke to in those 3 hours, but 8 or 9 that night called and made conversation with them. One of them was a man. One man, I don't know if it was one of the Johns, I don't know if it was the transvestite they were able to speak to, but they're trying to get out of this lifestyle too. And we were warned about this, that one of the hard things is you'll see this going on and you'll want to bitterly hate the people who are facilitating it, the people who are participating in it, but you have to remember that Christ died for them too. His blood covers over them too. And some of the men who are enforcers, they want to get out, but they don't have a way to make money enough to provide without this industry. Some of the Johns want to get out, but it's an addiction for them. They don't know how to get over. So 8 women, 1 man called that night. And then we got a text recently, a month later, 4 women had appointments in their building. 4 women. Praise God. 4 people. 4 more added to get out of that lifestyle. 4 more rescued. And it's not us doing it. They're empowering these people to make a life for themselves outside of that industry. Praise God, because He is working. And for those of us in the kingdom, we don't understand sometimes, because we get caught up in little things. Are we taking communion wrong? Should women have the veil? When should we meet? What should you eat? When should you fast? We focus on these minor things, and are we doing some things wrong? Surely. But when you see the wider world, there is so much darkness out there, and the light, when it comes in, it's just blinding. It's brilliant. Suddenly, the full magnitude, you can't understand it, but it's like looking out at the ocean. The full magnitude of the work that Christ started and is still doing today, between now and when judgment comes. It just puts whether you're supposed to stand or sit or wear a tie or not, the work he's doing is so much bigger than whether or not we're allowed to watch that R-rated movie. I'm grateful that I was able to help set up that Survivors event, and I'm very grateful that I was able to share the testimony that was shared with me that continues to be reported on to me about the tsunami of grace that our Savior is pouring out. There was more to that side of the house too. I was supposed to talk to you about our tourist day, where I got to go to some of the cathedrals that older than the United States, gorgeous buildings, and still in operation for the glory of God. But according to my little timeometer, we're closing in on about an hour, and that's twice as long as I like to keep these episodes. So we'll save it. One more, and I'll give you my personal testimony next time, and we'll finish up this recounting of my trip to South America. That about wraps it up for today. If you're still with me, thanks for bearing through this whole thing. Those are my thoughts on the problem of engagement, trying to get your players engaged, trying to keep your players engaged, and trying to get a campaign that transforms out of the railroad and into the sandbox, where you're not providing all the hooks, but the players take charge and motivate themselves. Have you experience in this regard? I'd love to hear from players. What were the things in campaigns you've played in that really stuck out to you, that made you want to engage with the campaign? Referees or dungeon masters, if y'all have had success in this area, if you've run these kind of games before, I'd be very curious to hear about what you did, your experiences. So feel free to leave a comment either on the video or on the podcast, or give me a call in. There's a link in the show notes for the SpeakPipe account, which I check on occasion. I'd be happy to hear from you, and if you leave it on the SpeakPipe, I will play it on the air. In any case, this has been the Whispering GM Podcast, an independent production by Clericsware Ringmail, intended for educational and informative purposes, and released under the Totally Steal This license. Some sound effects are retrieved from Pixabay, made available under the Creative Commons 0. Others are retrieved from Mixkit.co and used under the Mixkit.co sound effects free license. The theme is Hooligans by Michael Ramir C., downloaded from Mixkit.co and used under the Mixkit.co stock music free license. Parties interested in or with questions regarding the podcast are encouraged to reach out via the methods provided on the Clericsware Ringmail blog. Again, thank you for spending the last hour with me, and delve on.